Before we start today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for general reference and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be complete or exhaustive or to be applicable to any specific individual's medical condition. No information provided in this podcast constitutes medical advice and is not an attempt to practice medicine or to provide specific medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please do not rely on this podcast for emergency medical treatment. Remember that everyone is different, so make sure you consult your own healthcare professional before seeking any new treatment and before you alter, suspend, or initiate a new change in your routine. Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Sheets,
two internal medicine doctors who spent years practicing traditional primary care. Over time, we realized something was missing from modern healthcare. A real understanding of how everyday lifestyle choices impact overall health.
We'll help you cut through the noise of the countless health influencers and their conflicting opinions. Because no matter who you follow, the basics of lifestyle medicine are at the heart of it all.
Welcome back to The Starting Gate for Nutrition Part 2. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson and Dr. Sarah Sheets, and we're so glad that you've come back to check out Part 2 of our nutrition episode because we still have so many good things to talk about. We've got carbs, we've got fiber, we've got fat, protein, and added sugar. Before we get into that, Sarah, can you tell people a little bit about the Better Health Library?
I would love to. So to supplement our shows, we really wanted to have some additional resources for listeners to be able to use after they've listened to the show and they want to implement some of these things into their life. So we're creating resources that will be posted onto the Better Health Library. Some of them will be short, quick handouts. Other ones will be ebooks. And depending on the different topics that we talk about, we're going to have each month something new pop up in the library. Currently, we have 2 awesome ebooks that are out there. First one is Small Steps, Big Rewards, where we talk about 50 different habits that can help you transform your health, giving you a step-by-step guide on how to implement some of those habits. And then the other one is Better Habits Begin Here, where we really talk about in more depth actually creating those habits in our life and working on planning for setbacks and trying to have overall success when you're building better habits. So please go check those out. And if you do purchase any of these items, please leave a review. Let us know what you think because we want to be sure that we're creating things that will help you in your journey.
Okay, back to nutrition. So quick summary from part 1. We learned how to identify those ultra-processed foods. We learned how to look at the ingredient list and look for things that have fewer ingredients and ingredients that you recognize. And then we talked more than you ever wanted to hear about sodium. Now we are going to move on to
added sugar. Whew, this one is a huge one.
It is.
And sometimes if you get overwhelmed listening to all this information that we give you today and want to just focus on one specific thing, this is very high yield. Added sugars have just totally taken over our food industry, and we have just seen a ginormous escalation in the amount that is in our food today. Many food items that are on the shelves today, if you looked at them 20 years ago, their nutrition, their ingredients, and their facts would not match up because over time we have increased added sugars to food items that you wouldn't even think needed more sugar. And that's to make them more palatable and make them even more addictive to you because you get used to eating these high amounts of sugar.
Added sugars contribute about 266 calories per day in the U.S. And 100 years ago, a person ate about 10 pounds of sugar or less in a year. And now the average person eats about 150 pounds of sugar per person a year. And that's just crazy when you think about it that way.
It is crazy. And really, the next question is like, well, how much should I eat and how much am I eating? Well, the recommendations that are out there currently for added sugars, and actually I should pause because I didn't define this. When you look at a nutrition label, we'll go backwards here, you will see that it uses the terminology total sugars, and that is usually listed first. And then underneath that, you will see added sugars. We are specifically talking about added sugars. And that is because these are the sugars that have been added as extra ingredients, not natural sugars, which are included in that total sugar category and may be a part of that whole food that was added into this processed food in general. So added sugars, okay, just making sure we're on the same page there. Our recommendations are 25 grams or less of added sugars for women, which equates to about 6 teaspoons, or 36 grams or less for men, which is about 9 teaspoons. However, the average American is actually eating around 22 teaspoons of added sugar a day.
Yeah, and I know I've talked about sugar before, so this is where it's important to look at that nutrition label and look for added sugar, because remember, if you're just looking at the ingredient list, they may have tried to hide the word sugar, and so it may say high fructose corn syrup or sucrose or dextrose or agave nectar. Anything with ose at the end, anything with syrup, anything with juice or evaporated juice, that is all sugar. But you don't really have to memorize all of that. If you just go and look at the added sugar number, that will help you decipher what's in the ingredients as well.
And this is something that occurred in response to the low-fat phenomenon that we all lived through back in the 90s, where we had all these low-fat food items. When fat was taken out of many processed foods, we just started shoving more and more added sugars into food items to help with making them more flavorful. And we have only just seen a continued escalation that, because just like salt, the more added sugars you eat, the more you're going to crave. So if you are working on reducing your added sugars, again, this is going to be something that over time your body is going to have to get used to the lower amount. And after 3-4 weeks, you'll start to notice things that you used to crave or love may taste too sweet now.
You can always change those taste buds. So if you are someone that has a bad sweet tooth, just start paying attention to how much added sugar is in what you're eating, and then just see if you can start decreasing that. And you really will get to a point where you're not craving it as much.
One of my personal experiences that happens every year, because I have to say, holiday time, I have a hard time saying no to some of my favorite desserts and having a lot more sweets. But I quickly recognize around the holidays that when I do have more of those, then I crave more of those. And I start thinking about it more and I start wanting it more. So after the end of holidays, I immediately am like, I need a mental reset, because my taste buds have changed. It only took a few weeks for me to start having these cravings, and I mentally have to make a shift in order to get back on top of that again. So just know it's not that we're trying to say, hey, this has to be perfect all the time. It's more of the more aware you are and the more you're paying attention to it, the more control you can have over those cravings.
Right. So we still want you to enjoy those wonderful treats that you look forward to, that you associate with the holidays and, milestones in life. So if you can be more diligent about reducing the sugars in your everyday things, like the dressings you use and that kind of stuff, then you don't have to be as worried about enjoying that pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Okay. Those two nutrients, those are ones that I always like to focus on. And we're going to flip now and really talk about our macronutrients and those 3 buckets of carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Now, overall, there's not going to be any talk today on specific macronutrients, percentages that we recommend, etc. That is all so personal. That is so very individualized on what needs to happen. But in general, we want to talk about each of these macros and thinking about ways to pick those that are the highest nutrient density when we're thinking about the different buckets.
We'll talk about carbohydrates first, and carbohydrates are our primary energy source for our body. And carbohydrates include several things. So it includes natural sugars, it includes the added sugars, starch, and fiber. And there's a book called The Glucose Revolution. It's a really good book for illustrating how those carbohydrates are formed within a plant and to help you kind of understand what the differences are, that the fiber is what helps hold the structure to the plant, and the sugars are what's in the fruit to attract animals to help the plant continue its life. So it's a great thing if you ever really want to understand the difference between the sugar, starch, and the fiber. Or you may not care at all, which is also fine. Fiber, we'll talk about first. Fiber is something that 95% of Americans are deficient in. And the recommended...
I'm going to make Kitty say that one more time. Say that again.
95% of Americans are deficient in fiber. So this is one we really want to stress, because we keep finding more and more information about why it's so important. Currently, the guidelines recommend 38 grams a day for men and 25 grams a day for women, and that's really like the lowest level you want to achieve. You can get higher levels than this and see more and more benefits. Fiber is only present in plants. There are two main types of fiber, insoluble and soluble fiber, and they play different roles in your gut microbiome and health in general. It's actually thought there's probably millions of types of fiber, but these are kind of the two big buckets that things are classified into.
And you want to focus on getting both.
Yes, you definitely want both. The insoluble is the one you hear about that kind of helps with that stool bulk. The soluble fiber has a lot of other benefits like fueling your gut microbiome. And we know that fiber together, besides fueling your gut microbiome, improves your bowel movements. It decreases coronary artery disease. It helps stabilize your blood sugars and decrease insulin resistance. And then it also decreases diseases in the colon. The other thing we know is that the different gut bacteria you have in your microbiome, like different kinds of fiber. And so I know I mentioned earlier how much I like plant diversity and trying to get in those 30 different plants a week. And that's really so that you're fueling all these different bacteria in your gut that are going to do things to help you. So you want different types of fiber from different types of plants because you want to make different types of gut bacteria happy.
And a book that goes into lots of detail about this is Fiber Fueled, and it can kind of give you an idea of why fiber is so important for your gut microbiome. Because I know that's something that is a hot topic. We hear a lot of people talking about it, but actually understanding it is a little bit more complex. And I'll say I think research is just now starting to tip into all the information that's going to come out about this. So stay tuned, because I really think that this is going to explode in upcoming years. But one big thing is, since 95% of Americans are deficient in fiber, it is extremely important to note when you have a low fiber diet to begin with, if you're trying to increase your fiber, you have to do it slow. And that's because your gut bacteria, it's using that fiber. And over time, your gut flora will change, and it takes it time to catch up with the amount of fiber that you're eating. So a lot of people say, oh, I can't handle a high fiber diet. It makes me very gassy. One of the biggest things is how fast was that increase in fiber intake? And you really have to go slow, and that helps with that increase.
Yeah. And so we are saying if you go from no fiber to a lot of fiber, which is our ultimate goal for you, but if you do that quickly, you will have abdominal pain, you will be bloated, you will have gas, and you will be mad at us. So we are telling you, please go slow. Another thing we know about fiber is something called the second meal effect. If you give people, let's say, 100 calories of bread and 100 calories of lentils, and then look at their sugar afterwards, of course, the sugar is going to be less in the lentil group afterwards. But then if you look at their next meal, so if you did that at lunch and then you give them, again, 100 calories of bread with dinner, the group that had the lentils for lunch will have less of an increase in their sugar in that meal that is 5 hours later. So it's really incredible what fiber can do. It's not even just at that meal. It's continuing to act in your gut, and it's continuing to affect your response of glucose and insulin and all of those things, even when you eat something else later.
And just to clarify that, she's talking about blood sugar or blood glucose that many times when we were discussing prediabetes, diabetes, and we're talking about people's glucose levels, we will interchangeably use those words. So just to make sure that we all, when we say someone's sugar or their blood glucose, all those are one and the same. You just hear people talk about them differently. So I just want to clarify that so you understand when we use that terminology, because that is also something that we'll talk about a lot.
One other helpful tip with fiber is looking at the carbohydrate to fiber ratio. So if you divide the carbohydrates by the fiber, you want that to be 10 or less. And ideally, you want it to be 5 or less. So let me give you some examples for this. A sweet potato has 27 carbohydrates and the fiber is 4. So So 27 divided by 4, we've got 6.75, and that's less than 10, so we're good to go. Lentils, the carbohydrate level there is 23, and fiber is 9, so that ratio, 23 divided by 9, is 2.5, so that one's great. We're less than 5. Go lentils. Now, on the flip side, something like mini muffins, which is one of my kids' favorites, has a carbohydrate level of 27, and fiber is just 1, so that ratio is 27. So that's higher than 10, so that's not the ratio that we're looking for ideally. Or white bread is 20 carbohydrates, fiber is 1, so again we're at 20, which is over 10. Versus a bread that I found that was whole grain with seeds, and that one had a carbohydrate level of 12 and fiber 3, so ratio was 4. So this is a much better choice if you're looking for bread than the one that had the ratio of 20. So just another tip for things you can look at on that nutrition label when you're shopping. I guess that's all I have to say about fiber. We really both love the book Fiber Fueled and strongly encourage you to read it. I'll tell you, if you are in Lexington, it is on the Libby app if you want to make use of books that are free to use. So you can get it at the library or you can read it on your Libby app.
As we're still talking about carbohydrates, I like to talk about those natural sugars that we were discussing when you're looking at that nutrition facts. And I mentioned total sugars versus added sugars. So natural sugars are included in that total sugar number, and that's things that you get from fruit. So a lot of times you'll see a high total sugar number. If a piece of fruit had a nutrition fact label on it, you would see a higher number there, but it's not going to have high added sugars. Now, when our body receives a food in its natural package as a fruit, a lot of fruit also comes with fiber, and our body is able to digest it slower than if we have it in its unnatural and in its added form, which is what causes a lot of spikes in blood glucose. So understanding the difference in these two and that they have a different impact on your overall health is important because they're not equal.
Yeah. So you don't need to be afraid of fruit, but we do encourage you to eat fruit in its whole form. And that's going to regulate the amount of response you have to those sugars. The other thing that sometimes people worry about as far as their sugar and blood glucose goes are some of our starchier vegetables, things like potatoes and corn, and then our legumes like beans. So starches do contain sugars, but when you're eating those in their natural form, like if you're eating a sweet potato, you are going to have regulation of that, just like with the fruit, is not just going to digest that sugar immediately and send blood glucose through the roof. It's okay to eat starches, but you want to try to eat, again, unprocessed starches. Potatoes and corn are fine, and whole grains as opposed to processed grains. But beans, lentils, chickpeas, all those things are starches. The other thing just to know, specifically if you are looking to decrease your glucose and sugar intake, is you can turn these starches into something called resistant starch, which almost acts more like a fiber when it gets to your colon and fuels that gut microbiome. And you can increase the resistant starch in those foods if you cook them and then cool them down. Like a potato salad where you've cooked the potatoes and then it's been cooled down in their fridge. You actually absorb less sugar from that than you do if you were to just eat a baked potato.
And another tip on when you're eating carbohydrates is, again, we're not trying to make any specific nutrient a focus, right? It's all about the package of what you eat it with. And so carbohydrates, and if you're even specifically talking about blood glucose, if you eat a carbohydrate but have it with a protein item as well, or something that has healthy fats, again, it's going to cause a way lower glucose response than if you eat carbohydrates just alone. So it's always important to think about these things together instead of just individual food items for your optimal health, because we need all these macronutrients.
Yeah, I feel like carbs have been a little demonized over the last 10 years, and you don't need to be scared of carbs. It is okay to eat whole grains. It's okay to eat quinoa and brown rice and whole grain bread and potatoes and those things. You do still need to watch how much you're eating of that, but it's very different than when you're getting carbs from a muffin in a package. So those two things act very different, and you don't need to be scared of carbs, but you do need to be aware of what kind of carb you're eating.
All right, so I think we will leave the carb category and head into the protein category, which I know this one is everywhere when you are on social media talking about protein. And it is important, but again, we want to make sure that we send the message that all these things are important. But what is protein specifically important for? It's going to give us our building blocks for everything in our body, those muscle, the structures, our organs, and hormones. So it is crucial to have enough protein in our diet. It's also important to understand that when you are looking for protein, trying to have a balance in the type of protein that you eat. In our diet, we know we have 20 amino acids that we take in through protein, and 9 of those are essential. Some food items are going to be a complete versus an incomplete protein, and you may hear about this, and sometimes I think people get focused on the fact that, if someone does want to eat a more plant-based diet, that they cannot get all the essential amino acids. I will say that it is possible. You have to be strategic in doing it, but it's easier when you are having meat in your diet to know that you're getting all the amino acids. But it is possible to have all the amino acids from plants, but you just have to be sure that you're balancing the different types of protein sources that you're getting.
Yeah, and when Sarah is saying 9 are essential, that means 9 of those amino acids are ones that our body cannot make on their own. And so the other 11 your body can make. Those 9 they can't, and so we have to ingest those from food.
One thing that I think is really confusing in messaging is like, how much protein do we need? Again, this is one, if you're really wanting to understand, this should be discussion with a healthcare professional, but just so everyone knows, the actual recommended dietary intake for minimum, this is minimum, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. I will say that a lot of times when working with different patients on this, I recommend higher amounts than this if it's someone that is trying to lose weight or gain muscle or is very active or they are elderly, because they need higher protein amounts to meet those specific goals that we may have. So again, this really is a spectrum. There's not one specific answer to this, and it should be based off your body weight. And so I caution everyone, because there's so much advice out there on how much protein you should eat, and it's giving very specific numbers, and there is not one number per person. It really has to depend on the size of you.
Yeah, the size of you and what you're doing throughout your day. I mean, are you someone whose career is sports and you're exercising 8 hours a day? Your protein needs are going to be different than someone who's sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day and then walking for 40 minutes afterward. Very different things. And another thing I just wanted to mention, because I do feel like proteins being so heavily discussed in the media, is just knowing that when you take protein in, no matter what source it comes from, it's broken down into those amino acid blocks, and then your body just kind of hangs on to them and then uses those to build whatever it needs. So it's not just muscle, but it's building hair and skin and organs and hormones that your body uses and other signaling pathways. So every time you eat protein, it's broken down into those blocks, and then your body reuses it to build what it needs. So you do not have to eat something that has all the amino acids with each meal. You're going to be storing them. So as long as you're getting a variety, so if you are someone that wants to be more plant-based and you're worried that you're not getting all of the amino acids, just be aware, are you getting them regularly enough? And there are some plant sources that are complete sources. That would be quinoa, soy, so tofu, hemp seeds, chia seeds. And I may have already mentioned I love to put hemp seeds on everything. It's delicious.
Hide them everywhere.
Hide them everywhere. But it's okay if you eat beans one day and then you eat something with other amino acids another day, as long as you're doing it regularly enough. And if you are a meat eater, it's fine to be eating meat and then try incorporating some of these plant sources as well, so that you're getting some of your protein from different sources as well.
There is more than one way to skin a cat, is what we're trying to say.
And just check in with yourself. Like, how do you feel when you've been doing what you're doing? How do you feel like your weight's doing? How do you feel like your muscle mass is doing? How are your numbers doing when you go to your doctor? So just consistently check in with yourself and see, is what I'm doing working for my goals right now? And if not, then you shift.
And each of these macros, they may need to be adjusted based off what conditions that you have. And we know that there are specific dietary plans that work for specific diagnosis, and they may need to be adjusted according to that. So again, it's really important to understand what your personal needs are. Now we're going to move into the last macronutrient and talk about fat. Poor fat got such a bad rep, and we became so scared of it that now we have caused a mess.
Yes. I still very clearly remember all the Snack Wells things that my mom had that, all said 97% fat-free or...
I think 75% of the things in my house growing up said low fat on them. And here's the thing. Our body still needs fat to function. There are 2 essential fats, omega-3 and omega-6s, that we need to have in our diet. Big problem here. In that low-fat era, as I mentioned before, when added sugars also started to escalate, another thing happened. We decreased saturated fat in foods, and what happened was we started adding tons of oils into processed foods to help, again, making them very palatable, so we want to keep going back to them. And now we have created, even though we need some omega-6s, I'm not saying that we don't, we need some omega-6s, but we've created a diet that has such high levels of omega-6s that our ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is out of whack. And that is why you hear so much information out there talking about concerns with seed oils, which are things like canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, etc. It's not that having them in small amounts is the concern. It's they are just so high in our diet right now, and that's not how we need to think about it. And when we have that high omega-6 to 3 ratio, what is the concern? Like, why is there so much talk about this? What should I even be worried about? Well, omega-6, when it is so high in our diet, can become pro-inflammatory. So that's one of the concerns with this high amounts in all the foods that we eat. And a lot of times people ask us, like, well, how do I even know how much I'm eating? Well, one thing to realize is so much of the ultra-processed foods has these omega-6s in them. And one way to easily reduce it is just reducing your ultra-processed foods and not making it overcomplicated.
Yeah, so I think that's the easiest way to approach it. If you're going to decrease your ultra-processed foods, you're usually not cooking with a lot of these oils at home. So if you can decrease ultra-processed foods, you will decrease your omega-6. That's what I would focus on and not be too concerned about looking up specific seed oils. Just decrease ultra-processed foods and then try to increase your omega-3 specifically. And so omega-3s you can find in a lot of different seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds again. Nuts, walnuts in particular, and then fatty fish like salmon, herring, sardines, all of those are high in omega-3s. And really those are high in omega-3s because of what the fish eat. So the plants that the fish eat, algae. So you can go straight to the source and eat seaweed if you want to. Or if that doesn't sound great to you, eating salmon is a good way to get those in.
And we know that omega-3s are huge in improving our overall health. It's one of those things that we do not have exact targets to really shoot for as of yet, and something that hopefully research will give us better information. But again, we know if we increase those omega-3s, we're going to help that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in general and help decrease the inflammatory state that it can cause. Then this always brings up the next question. So, well, if I'm not using these other oils, what can I cook with? So that's always why you hear people talking about really leaning into avocado or extra virgin olive oil for cooking because of how it's processed, as well as the type of fats that make up it. It's going to have less of the omega-6 that you see in some of these other oils, and overall has some more nutrients that make them the healthier option for cooking.
So those are monounsaturated fats.
And that is to compare to the other type oils, which are polyunsaturated fats.
You can kind of remember that because they are liquid at room temperature, whereas a saturated fat is going to be solid at room temperature. So saturated fat's going to be butter, coconut oil, the fat that's found in animal meats. Solid versus liquid is kind of an easy way to remember that. And then another fat that came up was trans fats, and most of these have now been removed from foods in the U.S. because back in 2020, we actually put guidelines and made that a regulation for food companies that they had to remove trans fats because it was seen of how much effect they had on cardiovascular outcomes. So most foods now should not have trans fats. They are still allowed to have small amounts of trans fats. Under a certain amount, then they're able to label themselves as trans fat free. So less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving. However, I will say some foods just adjusted their serving size slightly so that they could still say they were less than 0.5 grams. So it's really the things you want to watch for is if you see partially hydrogenated oil. Things like baked goods still have trans fat. That would be one thing again, if you're trying to just cut ultra-processed food in general, you're not buying those little Debbie things, and then you're going to be avoiding the trans fats again.
And then the other fat that we need to talk about is saturated fat. And this one is, again, it's very specific to your own health history and how your body responds. There's some people that do better with higher saturated fat than others, and based off your family history, your genetics, etc., you can have a wide variety, or wide range, I should say, in the amount that you can have for your daily calories. Sometimes it falls in between 6 to 10% of your daily calories for saturated fat, but you specifically may even have more strict or more lenient guidelines on that. In general, Americans do eat a lot of saturated fat. Foods that are high in saturated fat are some of those high-fat cuts of meat, high-fat dairy, tropical oils like coconut oil, and many of the processed baked goods. Really, one of the highest things that we get our saturated fat from today is our fast food, in those fast food burgers and tacos, etc. That's really the biggest culprit for saturated fat in our diet.
Yeah, and we learned from the low-fat era that going low-fat actually did not help our metabolic health or our cardiovascular risk because they were replaced with other things. And we know from the Women's Health Initiative and the Predimed study, these are two studies looking at low-fat diets versus diets that have higher olive oil and monounsaturated fats, that they actually improve cardiovascular risk as opposed to a low-fat diet. So you don't need to be scared of fat anymore is what we're saying, but try to really think about not going overboard on the saturated fats, definitely trying to avoid the trans fats, and then using things like olive oil for cooking and trying to bump up anything with omega-3s. Can you add a handful of walnuts into your snack? Can you put a few chia seeds in your yogurt? Things like that just to bump up that omega-3 aspect.
As you can realize after listening to us talk about these 3 macronutrients, the key is balance. We need all 3. And as much as we have tried to game the system and figure out making one evil if it goes well, it hasn't. So we really need to realize that we have to focus on learning how to have balance.
So you want to look for foods, and we'll use this terminology a lot during our show, is you want nutrient-dense foods. And so what we mean by that is you want foods that are high in nutrients but low in calories. So you're getting that premium fuel for your body or your car to make it run the best that it can. Kind of thinking about our takeaways from this, I think the best 3 things to start with, because I know this is a lot. You can't just jump in and be perfect on everything and be looking at every ingredient. But what I would encourage you to do is to start with looking at the ingredients and really try to choose foods where you know what all the ingredients that are listed are and they're familiar things to you, and foods that have the fewest ingredients. So look at the ingredients, pick the least number of ingredients, and then look at that added sugar and look at your fiber. And if you do those few things, also still make sure you get enough protein. Oh, it's so hard to limit it. But if you do those things, I think you'll find yourself on a healthy path.
3 of my big takeaways would be, I'm going to say it again, it's all about balance. I just hate that we have criminalized so many different foods. Seriously, if you watch social media, you would think that there's nothing that you're allowed to eat. And that has just become a scary world because you have so much fear just even eating food. It's about balance. That's number 1. Please remember that from the show. Number 2, I think it's really important learning how to read nutrition facts and understanding the difference between whole food and processed food and ultra-processed food. And that is such a great building block of where to start. And once you get started, if you're needing more information, get a personalized approach from your healthcare team because they are really going to be able to guide you on where the biggest bang for your buck is when you're focusing on your nutrition. And then lastly, remember that all fads have ended up turning out bad. So if you get caught up in a fad, remember, hey, if I reflect back and look at all of these other ones that we have all kind of gone through, we found something wrong. So don't get caught up in those and really just trying to keep it basic and making those small changes where you can.
Thank you for hanging in there and listening with us. We're really hoping that this can just make you feel more confident when you're navigating the grocery store and navigating those food labels. But if there are topics that you feel like we skimmed over, or you really feel like you need more details on about nutrition, food labels, all of those things, please let us know, because we'd love to make sure we incorporate this and make you feel confident in the choices that you're making.
Don't worry, there will be lots of nutrition episodes in the future, so this was just to get us started. So you had an idea of just some of the information that we're wanting to provide. We have so much we want to talk about, and sometimes both Kitty and I can get long-winded when it comes to nutrition, so we have to be very cautious. However, this whole month we're going to be bringing more nutrition topics.
We're so excited next week to have our first guest, and that's Dr. Gina Leibovitz. She is a pediatrician in town with a passion for nutrition, and we're excited for her to come talk to us about some of the things like food additives and food dyes and how nutrition is affecting our kids.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify and share this with anyone else that you think could benefit. We also would like to hear your questions and ideas for topics, so please send those over to contact@thestartinggatepodcast.com. Have a great week.